This is The Weekly on ClickOrlando.com with Justin Warmoth.
Good morning, I'm Justin Warmoth. From I-4 construction delays to Chinese tariffs to disaster relief funding, Congresswoman Stephanie Murphy and I covered a wide range of topics on this week's episode. But Murphy and the rest of the Florida congressional delegation have much of their focus on which Florida counties were infiltrated by Russian hackers during the 2016 election. All right, so I know there's a lot going on, and I was trying to find a good place to start everything off. So why don't we just start with the latest when it comes to the Mueller report. Obviously, a lot has come out with that, but one thing that we have not seen or not, that hasn't been revealed yet is one pretty staggering line that stated that Russian hackers gained access to the network of at least one Florida county government. What have you been told about this?
Well, I haven't been told anything, and that's why my former DOD colleague and current Republican colleague, Mike Waltz, who represents a district here in Central Florida as well, we both asked DOJ and FBI to provide a briefing to all of the Florida House members. As elected officials, we deserve to know which county it was, what the extent of the hacking was, and whether or not the response we believe is adequate to protect Florida and our election process from foreign intervention.
Will there be a timetable for any sort of information coming out about that, or have they even told you that much?
They have accepted our request for a briefing, and so that will be coming up here shortly.
All right, well, we'll be watching out for that. When it comes to the Mueller report, have you read the whole thing and gone through it?
I'm working my way through it, to be honest with you.
There's a lot to it. Obviously, you've heard, a lot from probably, your members of Congress, your colleagues, and what do you make about it? What's your overall conclusion of the report, even though that you still have to go through some pages?
I think it raises as many questions as it answers, and because it is pretty heavily redacted, I think we need to be able to see the full report to see what the special counsel found, and then to determine whether or not there are areas that deserve further scrutiny and further oversight from Congress. But I think the one thing that is absolutely clear and agreed upon is that the Russians interfered in our elections. So I'm focused on what can we do to protect our elections from future foreign interference.
We've heard the president continue to say no obstruction, no collusion, right? And that's what we've really heard over the last month or so since this came out. Is he right when he says that?
I think the very last line of the report, or towards the end of the report, it basically says Mueller doesn't make a consideration on that. So it's important that we are able to see the full report and then consider the full set of facts and move forward from there to see whether or not the Russians worked with any Americans. And we know that they did work with a number of Americans that have already been indicted.
And one more thing about the Mueller report. Do you believe that Mr. Mueller should testify in front of Senate Judiciary Committee or House Judiciary Committee and really lay everything out under oath?
I think that we are in a democracy where there are a balance of powers, and it is within the congressional powers to call upon the executive branch and to call upon Mr. Mueller to testify. And I certainly hope that when called upon, these people will testify in front of Congress.
All right, let's move on now. You sent a letter along with other Central Florida members of the House and Congresswoman Val Demings and Congressman Darren Soto requesting a briefing on the updated I-4 timeline. Tell us about this and why you decided to do this.
Well, I-4 is over budget and behind schedule, and it uses significant federal resources in this build out. And so it's our oversight responsibility to see what is going on. And anybody who lives in Central Florida who has driven on the I-4 highway knows how dangerous and a bit confusing the lanes are, and the longer we are in the build phase of this, I think the more disruptive it is to Central Floridians. And so we're executing our oversight responsibilities to make sure that those federal dollars are spent well.
So the project was originally scheduled to be around 2021. That was what they said. Okay, 2021, this is going to be done. According to the most recent progress report, but that was in March, right? They had a 9-month delay. So is there concern that this is not going to get finished by 2021? And ultimately, if something like this isn't addressed, could we deal with this thing for upwards of 10 years possibly if it gets to that point?
Well, I certainly hope not. And that's why constant oversight and calling them into account and having reports and letting them know that people are watching to see how they're executing on federal and state dollars and whether or not they're being good stewards of taxpayer dollars is incredibly important. We have to hold them accountable to make sure that we get I-4 completed in a timely manner and close to budget. They're already over budget now, and there's not much that we can do to go back and fix that, but we certainly need to be pushing hard on them.
And when we talk about them, we're talking about the Florida Department of Transportation, right?
Right.
Obviously, overseeing this entire project. I'm curious why do you think they're being tight-lipped? What makes you think that they wouldn't want to be as transparent as they can when it comes to getting the information out to the people of Florida?
I can't guess on motives, but what I will say is that from my perspective, we need to demand the answers. The Floridians and Florida taxpayers deserve to know what is going on with their taxpayer dollars and why their lives are being disrupted by this build out that's taking too long and costing too much.
When this all was going through and there were some proposals, I know that this was before you were a member of Congress, but were you for I-4 getting expanded, or this overhaul of I-4 and the revamping of it? Were you for something like that happening?
This was before I was in Congress, but I believe in a region like Central Florida that is growing so fast. We need to think holistically about our transportation and infrastructure, and that means whether that's our surface transportation or whether it's rail or otherwise. And we needed to have a holistic plan and to have the investments into that. And that's why I'm working really hard in Congress to ensure that we move forward on this much talked about and little done infrastructure legislation.
Is this project, and listen, this is mainly for me, I'm really curious about this. Is this something that is well known throughout members of Congress who are not from Florida? Are they aware of something like this huge project going down in the heart of the tourism areas of the United States?
Well, certainly from your reps, they hear an awful lot from Rep Soto and Demings and I about how fast our region is growing and how desperately we need additional infrastructure dollars to support the growth of not just of the folks who are living here, but also the increase in the number of visitors that we have.
I couldn't imagine coming here and not knowing at least a little bit about the lay of the land and trying to figure out where to go. Right. Based on how the construction is all set up.
Right, the lanes, it feels like the lanes continually change, and it's a little bit risky getting out there some days. So.
It is, and the ramp's closed, and then you got to find a new exit. It's a whole mess. So this letter was sent May 10th on Friday of last week. Have you heard anything so far from them?
I haven't heard anything back, but we will continue to stay on top of it.
And coming up, Congresswoman Murphy will give us her thoughts on Chinese tariffs, why she wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post about being a capitalist Democrat, and disaster relief funding. Keep it right here.
This is The Weekly on ClickOrlando.com with Justin Warmoth.
Welcome back. My conversation continues with Congresswoman Stephanie Murphy. In this portion of the interview, the two-term member of the U.S. House will discuss Chinese tariffs, Special Olympics funding, and an op-ed she wrote in the Washington Post. But first, the disaster relief funding package passed by the House, something the president disagrees with. A bill that was just passed last week as well was the emergency relief bill. The House passed this. This is a bill that President Trump opposes. Why does he oppose it?
I think he opposes it for
Puerto Rico dollars.
Yes.
And why should Puerto Rico be involved in a disaster relief plan like this?
Well, Puerto Rico is still rebuilding from Hurricane Maria, and so I think that, those are fellow Americans that live on that island, and we have a responsibility to Americans across this country, no matter where they live or what their political persuasion is, to make sure that they have the resources that they need to recover from emergencies like hurricanes.
And $91 billion was in this relief package, this emergency relief bill. This is going across the country, though. This is wildfires, flooding, hurricanes.
In northern Florida.
And northern Florida as well. Of course, still recovering from Hurricane Michael last year. That area is still, we're coming up on, the 1 year mark about that, hurricane season right around the corner, and we might start hurricane season with places that people are still living in hotels.
That's right, and I don't think that we should hold up this emergency relief bill that is providing relief all across this country, because the president has a particular issue with one element of it. All Americans deserve to have the federal government assist in the case of natural disasters.
What's the word on whether or not the Senate will, work with you guys and get this done so this can get into play?
Well, I certainly hope the Senate will take this up. The Senate has been a little slow in taking up policy legislation as of late, but this one has such critical needs and affects so many people's lives that I hope that they do take this one up.
You wrote an op-ed a couple weeks ago, right, in the Washington Post, and it was labeled, titled, "I'm a proud Democrat, I'm also a proud capitalist." Why did you feel the need to write something like this?
I felt the need to write that op-ed because there's been a lot of conversation about socialism from a handful of Democrats, and then the national Republicans have been trying to paint the entire party with the socialist brand. And I think it's the furthest thing from the truth, and I also think it's irresponsible. I'm from a family that escaped socialism, and I know the darker sides of socialism, and I feel that, in this country, the majority of people don't support that system of economic, that economic system. And it's the normalization of that word is hurtful to my Cuban Americans, to my Venezuelan Americans who know the darker sides of socialism. Look, capitalism has its issues, and we have to address those issues. We have to make sure that everybody, no matter what zip code they're born into, has a fair shot at the American dream. And too often, that doesn't feel like the case anymore. And so there's a role for us to play to make our system better and more fair. But that doesn't mean that this is a moment in time to cast capitalism aside and embrace a system that we've seen fail in other parts of the world.
And I was going to ask you about that, because you did say that the best way to blunt the appeal of socialism in the United States is to improve capitalism so it works better for everyone. How do we improve capitalism to work better for the large amount of people that live in the United States? What's the best practice?
Well, we can address wage inequality. We have now seen wealth consolidated at the top levels, and there are not, people don't feel like they have the same opportunities, and so I'm supportive of raising the minimum wage, which hasn't been raised since 1993,
to $15?
To $15,
that's the
and
number.
we are working on ways in which we can make that get gradual, as well as provide some support for small businesses. And we have to be able to address this wage inequality. 1 in 5 people in Central Florida make under $20,000 a year. With the cost of housing going up, and the cost of healthcare going up, and the cost of education going up, people have the dignity of a paycheck, but they have the indignity of not being able to care for their family. So what do we do to make sure that the system is more fair? It also means equal access to education. Education for me was the single determinant that changed the course of my life. And I think we need to make sure that we have school systems that allow people to still get that quality education and be able to move on and make better for themselves. The promise of America is if you work hard and play by the rules, you'll be able to get ahead. And insofar as we can provide left and right boundaries and regulations that keep consumers safe and ensure that there's equality as opposed to a significant imbalance in our system, that's how we make this better.
Special Olympics. Something that's really close to your heart, and it's coming to Orlando. The Special Olympics are in 2022, so that's going to be really fun. $20 million secured for Special Olympics. We go back to, of course, the big headline when this, not all started, but the big headline a few months ago was Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos trying to defund the Special Olympics. I'd like to know what your reaction was when that all came out.
I was deeply disappointed to see the White House's proposed budget callously eliminate all Special Olympics funding. I think it's incredibly important that we support this organization, which is the largest organization of intellectually disabled athletes. And it's really important here in Central Florida. As you said, 2022, we are hosting the Special Olympics. It's going to be a great honor for this city to host that event. And that's why I worked hard to make sure that we restored that funding.
That's something that you would think would be bipartisan, right? I mean, partisan politics unfortunately controls a lot of the things that get through and don't. But this is a topic that you would assume has support from both sides. You would assume it would have support from both sides, and I think maybe they didn't realize the blowback that would occur. And I think the administration reversed its position after the public outrage. I know President Trump was pretty adamant about clearing some things up, saying that he was not the one who wanted to do this, and that's a topic for another day. Let's talk about the tariffs, if you don't mind doing that really quickly. Yeah. Wall Street, obviously, we're seeing the blowback here. What needs to happen when it comes to the U.S. and China working something out? What needs to happen is a coherent economic policy from this administration. I think that while nobody disagrees that China engages in unfair trade practices and we needed to negotiate to make sure that they made the structural changes to be a more fair trading partner, the approach by which this administration embarked on this negotiation has been a bit chaotic, and now you're seeing it manifest itself. Instead of working together with Europe, which is China's largest trading partner, the two of us together could have been a real force to force change. But we opened up a multi-front, and the administration opened up a multi-front trade war instead. And so we've alienated our allies, and we've emboldened China. And unfortunately, the president also has a misunderstanding of what tariffs are. Let's be very clear. The American people, the American consumers pay the tariffs. It's not a tax on China the way that the president continues to try to say it is. And the latest study says that these tariffs that just the U.S. has implemented is going to cost the American consumer on average $800 additional for goods that they're already buying. What family making $20,000 a year can afford an $800 increase in basic needs? Right. And so, there are consequences to these tariffs, and I wish the administration would be a little more sensitive to that, because I'm certainly hearing it from my Central Florida community, from the small businesses who find a 25% tax on their goods very difficult to navigate around. And I'm sure we'll begin to increasingly hear from Central Florida families who are finding that the price of their basic necessities is going up. For more on the topics Congresswoman Murphy and I discussed this morning, just head over to clickorlando.com/weekly. I'm Justin Mormith. Have a great Sunday.